it's very fashionable right now to talk about, building a city in the cloud or network states or this or that. It's like, yeah, well, come to fucking Urbit and let's fucking go, baby. Let's actually do it. Let's not stop. Let's quit talking about it. All right, what's going on, everybody? This is the Other Life podcast. I am Justin Murphy. I am here today with James Geary from Zora. He's an engineer at the NFT platform Zora, and also SickDev Pilnup. But I don't think I have it in me to use those words verbally with my own speech. Also known as Kenny Rowe. So, we are going to talk today about an interesting idea that James floated on Twitter. Basically, a couple days ago, James tweeted. I have the tweet right here. He said, "If you understand what party bid on an Urbit Galaxy means, and you would want to be a part of that, please hit me up." And it's not like it went mega viral or anything, but there were a healthy number of people who were really into it. And I noticed that a lot of them are not necessarily Urbit people. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh, this is pretty interesting. There's like some energy here. And I thought the idea was really cool myself. As people who listen to the podcast know, I've been, doing my own experiments in this area. It's something I'm very interested in generally. So I thought, hey, actually, I said to James, I was like, and I know a lot of Urbit Galaxy brains, and it's something that people in my audience are interested in. So I was like, why don't you come on the podcast? Let's hash this out. Let's actually brainstorm it and talk about it. And I'll connect you with some Urbit people in the Urbit community, and let's see what comes of the discussion. So that's pretty much the concept for today's live stream and podcast. So without too much further ado, let's maybe learn a little bit about the guys I've gathered here today. So James, I don't know much about you other than the fact I know you're an engineer at Zora, but if you would start by just giving us a little bit of some background into like, how did you first get into crypto? What's your history and trajectory there? And then leading up to kind of how you got into Urbit or how you see Urbit.
Totally. Yeah. And hey, everyone. So, at the end of 2016, I had just signed an offer to be a software engineer after I graduated. And I was going to work at a company with a web app. And I started to realize that I was not super excited about that prospect after the euphoria had subsided. And I started to research other things going on in tech that excited me. And that's when I came across Ethereum. And then, I was just super into Ethereum, the whole like 2017 up and down. And I took the first job in crypto I possibly could. And I worked at a small project out of Consensus in 2018, and then shortly after that moved to a company called Numerai in San Francisco, which is a crowdfunded data science competition that uses crypto staking incentives. And so at both like Consensus and Numerai, and even now at Zora, I'm writing like traditional backend code, but it interfaces with smart contracts. Basically I'm the one that's building the server that watches the blockchain and like knows what's happening. I've also done front end as well. So I understand, a lot of what we do involves IPFS, which is a distributed storage solution. And we try to rely on those things as much as possible. But as I was saying earlier, there's this compromise, which is like the core business logic needs to live on a smart contract to say that you're doing something with Web3. Or basically, the user needs to be able to log in with a crypto wallet, not a username and password. That's kind of like the minimum requirement to call something Web3. And ideally, yes, you have something in a smart contract. Ideally, it's an asset so that it can be priced and traded, because that is what generates a lot of excitement in the space. But then people make a lot of trade-offs to be able to ship a good product. And it's still pretty hard today to build a good product with a good experience that doesn't end up relying on private cloud and running a server that has privileged information to some extent. So as I was working at Numerai in San Francisco, I started going to Urbit meetups. I think a friend of mine just mentioned it to me one day. So I would just go and meet people and learn about Urbit. And I started to feel like Urbit is basically it's going after like the real promise of Web3, and making absolutely zero compromises. And so I have this thesis basically that there's the Web3 world that calls itself Web3, and this is where I am right now. And it's full of people who are super excited about NFTs and tokens and all sorts of things that you can do with a crypto wallet rather than with a username and password. But then there's Urbit, which is like we, just absolutely zero compromises, no client server at all, just sort of from the ground up. And so I have this thesis that Web3 people need Urbit really badly, and they don't know it. And if we could bring those people over to Urbit and give them a good reason to come over, we might see something really interesting happen on Urbit, and we also might see some of these projects really flourish. For example, I gave the example earlier. Friends with Benefits is a really cool project. It's a community where you need to own some token to be a part of it, and they kind of run things a bit like a DAO, but it all really runs on Discord right now, and to me that's just tough. And I would really love to see those projects using like decentralized compute that they actually own. So that's kind of the main motivation, and then the thought process that led me towards, okay, well, let's crowdfund a Galaxy is, what is the thought process is what's going to excite Web3 people today about Urbit, and the truth is it's going to be owning a token that could possibly be valuable. It's like a really like quick way to bootstrap interest in something new is like, oh well, there's a token, so maybe at the bare minimum you're interested in just upside. And that's, obviously there's a lot of spam that tries to capitalize on that, but it is what it is. So, and as I know, like Urbit IDs are NFTs, and as I think actually many people, even people aware of Urbit, don't know, Galaxies are governance tokens. They're NFTs, but it's one galaxy, one vote. In the realm of voting, it is a fungible token. And I think many people don't know this, and I think that it wouldn't be too hard to kind of wrap that system and actually fractionalize it, and it wouldn't be too hard to make kind of a new governance layer on top of Urbit. And I'm pretty confident that if we could do that, and if we gave a lot more people an opportunity to feel like they own a piece of Urbit and they're invested in its success, I think that alone would spark a lot of interest in actually really migrating over. Because I know, Justin, like you use this phrase like exit. Like I think a lot of us want to see people leave Twitter, like actually. And it's tough. Like I like Twitter, but yeah. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I think I'll stop there.
Awesome. That's perfect. Thanks for that, James. Kenny, maybe we should hear from you a little bit about just, what are you picking up there? People might already know a little bit about Kenny because he's been on the podcast before. So Kenny, maybe you don't have to recapitulate your whole history, or how about I'll do it for you real quick. So Kenny is kind of OG Urbit devotee, and Kenny's been kind of floating around my community for a while, and Kenny's taught me a lot about what I know when it comes to crypto and Urbit. So Kenny was active in like MakerDAO, and he's been very active in many projects, and he's also a member, I believe, one of the founding members of the Dalten Collective, which is basically a kind of DAO on Urbit. And so Kenny's been thinking about these things for a very long time. So let's just get into the thick of it then, Kenny. What are you hearing when you listen to James talk about how he sees it?
Well, actually, a lot of inevitability. Like I've been, like you said, Justin, I've been around sort of this Urbit space since, well, I think I first booted, the first thing I ever booted was probably a Comet, and it was just to sort of see how this thing worked. And back then there was no landscape. Everything was command line only. There was only one chat room, and it would often sort of just get wiped away with the next release. So there was very little continuity to Urbit, but eventually you started to get to know people's, the little names that they've got, sort of these human readable names. And I played around for a while, and then sort of like, okay, well, I'm going to come back to this later. And then eventually kind of basically made it my full-time thing in 2019 is when I really jumped within 2 feet into this kind of the Web3 space and Urbit. But there's always been this my passion for sort of these new organizational structures that I've been part of since my first days in Bitcoin in like 2012 and 2013, was that these technologies are allowing things that were never possible before. And I think there's some odd baggage that's come along with us for the ride, meaning like the words decentralized autonomous organization, a lot of the things that you could point to as quote DAOs are neither decentralized, very autonomous, or that organized. So but there's something there. There's something there. And I truly think that if these groups knew what kind of possibility there is on running your own computer, running the things that you do with your own computers in a network that you can talk to peer to peer, and just how limitless that possibility is, from interacting with these blockchains already to hosting traditional Web 2 applications, because Urbit is just a server, it's just a computer, right? It really is going to be a game changer when it sort of catches on. I really do think that. But this way of governing, these way of putting things together is just as applicable in sort of the Urbit space as it sort of is on the Discord server right now, right? So the Dalten Collective is, normally people would call the Dalten Collective a DAO. We don't call it that because we're just more interested in sort of being honest about what it is that we're doing, right? We're not decentralized, but we are distributed, which most of the time in these groups are very distributed. So they're not specific to one like geographic area. They're usually spread across the entire globe, and that's by default usually, and Urbit makes that possible. Okay, that's great. And so the autonomy, though, right? Where does that autonomy come from? The autonomy comes from owning as much of that stack as possible. And communication is key. You cannot get anything done if you cannot communicate, right? And if you own all of that, if everything is peer-to-peer, then that's true autonomy. Plus the autonomous business logic that lives on some sort of blockchain. And then organization is just, that's about skill, how organized and how well can you coordinate with these sort of different mechanisms. So I think the idea, though, to bringing these structures to Urbit makes a lot of sense. And like James mentioned, Galaxies right now in the Urbit network, they're sort of in charge of, for lack of a better word, property rights. Who owns what? That's what the Urbit Galaxies really sort of decide on, or vote on, I should say. And right now it's one galaxy and one vote. And to my knowledge, those are all individual persons. I don't even actually think it's possible that there's probably some, corporations or startups that own some as well, besides Talon, that is. But I've always had this notion that these things should be collectively governed, like the Dalten Star is. The Dalten Collective owns and operates an Urbit Star collectively, and I think that's why it was so cool to see James's tweets. Like, yes, it's happening. I think this could really work. And it's in its time. I think it really is.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem to me, as someone who's not an engineer and only kind of lately very convicted in Urbit, it seems to me that building all of these crypto applications and crypto communities on these corny old Web 2 platforms is just so obviously a bad fit. It's so obviously it's got to give. It's going to give. It makes no sense. And the power and attraction of Web3 is like bubbling up, but it's overflowing what Web 2 can really offer it, or what Web 2 can contain. And lo and behold, it seems to me, like I think it seems to you guys, Urbit is basically precisely the kind of ideal system to encompass and support and be the ground upon which Web3 grows. So what I'm thinking is, for people listening or watching who maybe have no idea what Urbit is, maybe I'll kind of back up very briefly, and then I'll turn to you guys and we can go deeper into the thick of it. But for people who are maybe confused already, Urbit is essentially a different kind of internet. It's an alternative internet. As Kenny said, it's just a computer, but really it's a network of computers. So it's a new kind of computer that is built from the ground up to be able to network with other computers. So in the status quo, what we call Web 2, the current normal internet, we have these browsers, right? We can call them clients, and to access the information on the so-called internet, we almost all of us are connecting to these big, massive servers that are owned by big companies, AWS or whatever. It's very centralized. Who owns the land on the internet is a very small number of companies. We are just peasants who use our little web browsers to connect to land owned by these megaliths. And what Urbit is basically, it's a redesign of the computer itself and a redesign of the networking architecture that computers use. itself. So it's basically a complete rewrite of how computers even work and network with each other, and such that in Urbit, every computer is its own server. That's kind of the key thing here. So you're not dependent on big, land masses that are owned by other agents, but everyone is their own little landmass, and every little landmass can speak with and communicate with and even share software with and even compute with the other computers that other individuals own. And so we're going to go deep now into some of the technical questions related to, what you can do with Urbit Land and how it can be organized, and the interesting and creative ways of crowdfunding it and possibly governing it collectively, as James floated in his tweet. That's the basis of this conversation, and as Kenny's been thinking about for a long time. But maybe I'll just very briefly, for people who have no idea what Urbit is, just say a few more words, just as background information that will make the rest of this make sense. So Urbit has basically this kind of land metaphor, specifically a kind of outer space metaphor, right? So the main unit for most individuals is the planet. The planet is basically just an individual computer. It's a personal server, and it's in the network in such a way that it can communicate peer-to-peer and interact peer-to-peer with other planets. These are also called ships, and there's billions of planets, so they're not scarce. They're finite, and they are scarce, but there's plenty of them. One level up, it's kind of a multi-level model. One level up are stars. There are far fewer stars, but still, many thousands. And stars spawn planets, so each star can generate a bunch of planets. And then higher up from stars are galaxies, and there are only 256 galaxies. Galaxies spawn stars, and then stars spawn planets. So it's this multi-level structure, the architecture of the network. And so what that means is basically galaxies are really scarce, because there's only 256, and there only ever will be 256. So currently galaxies go for somewhere in the low millions if you want to buy one on the open market. And unfortunately, I did not get into Bitcoin early enough to be able to afford one myself. Many of us can't, but the idea is it would be quite cool, actually, if we could use different types of crowdfunding and crypto technologies to actually get a whole bunch of people to go in on a galaxy and collectively together own that highly scarce, highly desirable, highly powerful, a piece of the network, of the address space. So that's just a kind of like total newbies background primer for what we're talking about. So the idea here that we're discussing is, what would it look like to actually do that? What kinds of technologies would we use? What kinds of challenges would we face? And if there's enough interest, it seemed like from James's tweet, there seems like there's a lot of interest. I think there's a very good possibility that from here on, we actually might try to do this. So if this sounds interesting to you, if you have anything to contribute, definitely get in touch. We're going to be kind of discussing this for at least another hour or so, I would think. But we have James actually whipped up a Discord server just in the past few days, specifically to talk about this and to work on this. There's a link in the show notes. And of course, there's also an Urbit group as well. And there's a link in the show notes. So this is just the beginning. This is just a kind of discussion of this idea. And I hope that was enough for people who have no idea what they've just walked into. I hope that's enough to give you some background and some interest in what we're doing. So let's maybe drill down a little bit more. James, why don't you start by saying a little bit about your initial idea for how this would be implemented technically, and then I know you've been doing some research in the past few days. How to let us know if your thinking changed. What's your current thinking about how you would want to proceed to do something like this?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as I mentioned in the tweet, and the very original idea was, let's just get a bunch of people together, buy a galaxy, and manage it together, and just sort of see what happens. And that still is very much like the core of the idea. But as I was doing research over the weekend and the past few days, and I read deeply through the Urbit smart contracts. It was a joy to read them. They're very well written. Shout out to whoever wrote those. And so I'm more familiar now with the actual protocol and the way that the address space is managed on Ethereum. And so I've been thinking about it, and I think given that one galaxy, again, galaxies are NFTs because they have like unique identities, but in the context of voting, they are fungible. One galaxy, one vote. And so you could think of votes as actually a fungible token. And so the current thinking is, rather than, let's buy one galaxy and see if we can make it cool and see if we can make, the DAO token that represents ownership in that galaxy valuable. Now I'm thinking about, like, let's build a new layer on top of Urbit governance, and let's make a generalized way to fractionalize galaxies. And so the output of that would be a new ERC20, which directly represents, like, in a way that's just sort of hard coded, just like a piece of a galaxy, and really a piece of any galaxy. It's actually not, it's like not specified which one it is. And so there's sort of a few mechanisms. I don't want to be sort of going all over the place here. So the first part is, like, how do you actually buy it? And initially, this is definitely going to be OTC. I personally know the guy who knows the guy who owns the galaxy that's for sale, and we're going to be coordinating heavily together over iMessage. So this is, like, not, we don't need this to be running smoothly, fully decentralized on chain from day one. But I think that we do need to think about, like, on chain, how does it actually work? How do we let people get involved, so that we're not, like, basically so that we can raise money, but also so that we're not, being unfair or putting anyone at risk. And so I've been thinking a lot about that specifically. And basically, I think for this DAO, anybody who is an owner of a galaxy should be able to, like, list the galaxy for sale and set an asking price. And then I believe there should be a period of time, maybe it's capped at a duration, where people try and contribute enough, let's say it's priced in ETH, contribute enough Ethereum to, like, hit that asking price. And then, let's say, I've thought through this a little bit, let's say you never meet that price. You could give the galaxy owner the option to take the next best price that was possible, or to just cancel and bail. But let's talk about now if that works. Then it's pretty simple. I believe the token supply should be, of this new ERC20, should be 256 times whatever. I think, a huge problem here actually is just that the number 256 is too small. Like, I think Urbit has designed a really elegant system, but I think the numbers that they chose were actually maybe not ideal. They couldn't have anticipated it, but I don't think they're ideal when it comes to, right now, how many people are interested in owning crypto and being a part of something. So I think 256 is just too small. So let's say one galaxy is 10,000 tokens, and you have, or 1,000 tokens, let's say. And so there's going to be 256,000 tokens that are possible to mint. And really, for every one that we buy, that just mints another 1,000 and distributes them accordingly to the people that contributed ETH to buy it. So that's kind of like the main thing that we need to figure out. And as much as I'd like to just buy a galaxy with some friends with a multi-sig, I think we really should figure that out before we go further, because I want this to, again, the goal here is for people to be able to own a small piece of a galaxy.
Yeah, so I think the general pattern here is to wrap the 721, that's the ERC standard for non-fungible tokens, with something that's more user friendly and more easily distributed, plus just has other optionality part as a component of it. I think that's probably the right way to go. Okay, so if that is the right way, what would it sort of look like technically? So there's some things that are different about Urbit address space in terms of the tokens themselves, and they're not just art, right? Where they've got the standard, which is like transfer and those kinds of functions, but they've also got a whole set of other functions that they call, which is like voting or spawning new address space, all this other kind of stuff, which needs to be supported in whatever wrapper is decided upon. Now, these do exist, right? So there's currently a project right now to sort of wrap stars, mostly, because these stars are the ones that are most sort of widely distributed in terms of, they're not just the personal identities, but they're more like, if you want to do something interesting with Urbit besides just whatever you personally want to do, usually stars are the way to go. And then Galaxies have always been sort of a little bit further off, but now, potentially they're getting closer. So things like setting a management proxy, which is important because the manager of the point itself has a responsibility to keep the Galaxy up and running and forwarding packets for its dependents. And maybe just to clarify what that means, when we're talking about this hierarchy, these galaxies, stars, and planets, this is the networking layer. This doesn't have anything to do with what your ship can do or what you can do with it. There's almost no. The only thing that these things do is help with peer discovery. And that's important because if you don't have professional class peer discovery, you have a problem, which is sort of like another network similar to Urbit is a network called Secure Scuttlebutt, right? And Secure Scuttlebutt will they've got this propagation mechanism that will push messages throughout the network, but you have to know where to connect. And that node, if it's not online, you need to find some other node. So basically, you've just got these these monolithic servers that are keeping track of things for you, right? And if they ever go offline, then you're kind of screwed. Or if you don't know how to handle it, you could get sort of balkanized, or even you can't talk to anybody. That's why we've got a sort of professional citizens doing this routing for us. So stars will route for their planets, meaning if I don't know your IP address and the star that we both are connected to does, then they send the first connection for us, and then we do everything peer to peer. And the same with the galaxies. The galaxies can also be thought of as like DNS root nodes in the kind of the existing internet system, right? And there's actually not that many of these things, and it works pretty well, right? So it's kind of almost like instead of a pyramid-shaped hierarchy, it goes lower. It's like plumbing, right? But like I said earlier, the galaxies have this one additional responsibility, which is property rights, which is of all of these types of different things. How do we know who owns what, when those change hands, like all that kind of stuff? That is managed by this group, and you could also think about it in terms of maybe a few other different ways because the names are shorter. When we talk about address space on Urbit, like the names get bigger and bigger as and harder to say, sort of like bigger numbers. But the galaxies, they're very small, right? They're like 3 letters, so they're easy to remember. So in that way, they're useful for potentially business applications because, like premium domains are, right? So there's possible business things that could be done with these outside of the routing, but they need to be, when they are wrapped, those functions need to be supported, and likely the ERC20s that they spit out will have some way of controlling that functionality, meaning either by voting or some other mechanism in that way.
So, Kenny, you had alluded before to there being existing tools that can handle this. Mm-hmm. Do you want to maybe speak more to that? Unless you already know all this, in which case you can stop me.
No, this would be very helpful.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So existing tools, and let's call these DAO frameworks, of which there are many, but maybe I'll just speak upon the ones that I'm the most familiar with. But James, you already mentioned one, which is the most simple thing you can do, which is a multi-signature smart contract. In this case, probably Gnosis Safe is the most well-known one. This is literally how the Dalten Collective does it, right? It's nothing fancy, but what we did was we basically pushed the bytes because there's no interface as well right now. There will be soon, but we pushed the bytes to the Athmas smart contracts, which is actually those property rights that we talked about and those additional functions. We pushed some bytes through that, and now we own it together, which is like a 3 of, I think it's a 4 of 7 or 3 of 7 multisig, and any 3 of those members can do anything that the star can do: spawn planets, change ownership, all of that kind of thing. That would be the easiest way to do it. Now, all the way at something at the other end might be something called like a Moloch smart contract, where you see these often. The Metacartel sort of they give out grants, and then they have another branch called Metacartel Ventures, and this is what they use to manage their holdings. So these holdings, this portfolio of either tokens and sometimes even equities, are owned by a group of people, usually less than 100 or so, and it's primarily done through some sort of voting system. Now, these are great for managing ERC20 tokens. They're not really good for 721s, right? But they do have some functionality. They have these sort of like almost like multi-sig sort of modules called minions that can do sort of arbitrary function calls. So you would put the galaxy in this minion, and then you could use the shares in the DAO to vote and exercise that. The problem being is that these multi-sigs or these Moloch contracts have what's called a rage quit function or a guild kick function, which is basically anybody can leave at any time and take their proportional share with them. But those minions are outside of that scope. So you would never, it would be kind of like a one-way trip. It would be more like a trust as opposed to like a kind of a DAO, right? So and that's the kind of the issue with a lot of smart contracting platforms is they're kind of feature and specifically built for some sort of thing. And ERC 20 or 721s are not really well supported in this sort of ecosystem. So it's also possible that, creating a wrapper for this and then using those ERC20s and then putting those into some existing smart contract platform might also work as well.
That's really helpful. So I totally agree. And this is the conclusion I came to over the weekend, which is that like whatever entity owns a galaxy, they'll need to be able to do absolutely everything that a galaxy owner can do. And a lot of that, there's a lot more than voting. And on chain, there's like 4 different basically proxies that you can set or change, or there's a number of things you can do on chain as the owner of a Urbit point. And it would be, tragic if we all got together to buy a galaxy and then like, God forbid, like didn't even have the ability to transfer it out, let alone do any of the things that we needed to do to manage it. So yeah, I mean, this would need to be in addition, like there's sort of 3 components. There's the mechanism for actually being able to buy the, individual galaxies at any time as they become available. And then there's, there needs to be like a wrapper around the Urbit contracts so that the holders of the ERC20 can actually sort of do things together, with some quorum or whatever to actually like execute the various like Urbit smart contract functions. And then finally, I think that this should also be a DAO sort of within itself. So I think the DAO should maintain a treasury, probably build it up through these sales. And I think the DAO should be able to, vote on arbitrary proposals, and, should be funding cool things and generally like trying to add to the value of the sort of land that they own. Yeah.
And there's also one small distinction between galaxies. So there are galaxies that are full of stars, or even some number of them, not all of them, but some. And then there are some that are completely what we call naked galaxies, right? So the only thing they do is vote and or whatever you might use the actual galaxy itself for, and likely would have very, very different prices, right? So something that has no stars would be much more affordable than one that does. But if you had a galaxy that had a bunch of stars, the DAO could sell those for revenue.
Yeah, I mean, I think
we'd further fund other operations.
We definitely want those stars, right? We definitely want those stars. We want to build out a whole kingdom, right? We don't want one of these naked galaxies. What fun is that? Because but no, seriously. So for people again who maybe have no idea what we're talking about, being able to spawn stars and then planets from those stars is basically unfolding the space. It's unfolding the network, and having a kind of collectively governed galaxy that actually runs stars and planets underneath the stars is way cooler. That's just right. I mean, of course, that's what we want, right?
Well, actually, I would say, so yeah, I agree that we obviously do want stars to be like associated with these galaxies, but there's 2 benefits of getting a naked galaxy. One is that, like you said, Kenny, it's cheaper. So like I have this like OTC naked galaxy lined up, and it's just much cheaper. It'll be easier to crowdfund. And then, we also have people, I got a lot of interest from people who have stars and are willing to like contribute and actually sort of migrate their stars over to a naked galaxy. So there are like workarounds to that. And I actually think that the last point is that given that all the Galaxy can do is vote, I actually think that's kind of a better place to start here, because the like minimum, like I would say like the minimum functionality for this would be an ERC20 that's capable of voting in Urbit governance proposals, and then capable of like, you know, basically unwrapping and sending the Galaxy elsewhere if it needs to. That would be like very like minimum functionality. So given that, I actually think there's a couple reasons that, you know, we should consider a naked Galaxy. The goal here is to buy every Galaxy, like, so it doesn't really matter long term, but yeah, I mean, I think we could think about a naked one to start, mainly for price, or
Oh wait,
somewhere
so
along the road.
okay, that's interesting what you just said. That was not obvious to me at all, that the goal is to buy every Galaxy. Because, okay, so what you're thinking is basically you want to increase the number of Galaxy level owners, basically, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Effectively changing the number of top level owners from 256 to something much larger. Interesting. Okay, that's a little bit more ambitious. I didn't realize that's actually what you were thinking.
Yeah, exactly. This is something I came to over the weekend, which is that like I would want to. The first thought was like, you know, if a new Galaxy comes in somehow, it should be the same token, right? And then that sort of got me thinking, how would that work? And then I realized, you know, why not just build a generalized wrapper around Galaxies that just like fractionalizes the voting power. So, I mean, I don't know why I don't have like some like domination ambition where I need to like own every Urbit Galaxy, but I would want this to support that, so that it literally could just be a new wrapper on Urbit governance that just enables more people to take part in it.
Okay, interesting. And by the way, folks, we have a few other Urbit folks hiding in the wings who, at the end of this conversation, I will invite a couple of them to join us and maybe throw in a question or throw in some input. So for the few people in the private waiting room, just hang tight. You'll have an opportunity to come up. Okay, so what kind of challenges and difficulties is this going to encounter? Like, what are the big roadblocks? Are there, or is this fairly, like, how straightforward is this?
Well, there's already generalized wrappers. So the wrappers that I've seen are fairly simple. They don't have the other sort of functions that you would need to add, but they do have interfaces to Azimuth already. So like the transfer function, for example. So adding those in would be one thing and typically they're right, or the ones that I've seen, they support stars, but that's just changing the type, right, from one type to another. And then what James said, you can either go after that, I mean, basically it's already there. You have two options when it comes to tokens that spit out of this. You can have one generalized wrapper token, which, like James said, could continually to ingest more Galaxies, and then increase the supply of that ERC20, but always the same one. And then you could have like a certain number can redeem it, so that if you ever wanted to sell one, you just get a number of these tokens and you could redeem it, right? Or the other way you could do this, if you didn't want to just have one wrapper that was generalized, you can just redeploy it separately. And then all the ERC20s that would be spit out would be specific to that particular Galaxy. And you could even write it in the smart contract that is only good for one Galaxy. You'd know the name ahead of time, right? And that's something you could just specify only this Galaxy. And once you wrap it, then it's sort of like this hermetically sealed thing, and unlikely to ever change, because if you need everybody's 100% vote to sell it or to move it, that's unlikely to happen, though possible. But you probably wanted to be thinking about this as something almost like a trust, right? Once it goes in, it probably is going to stay there.
So what are the tokenomics involved here? Like, what is I guess like is it a fairly straightforward value proposition? It's just like people will want to own the token for the same reason people want to own Urbit address space, because it's scarce and because the value is expected to rise over time. Or how kind of tricky are we looking to get on that front? I'm just curious what you guys are thinking.
Yeah, so I mean, so my thinking is like, I've seen like I know what works in the like Ethereum world generally, and like, you know, NFTs are doing really well right now for a lot of different reasons. There aren't enough Galaxy NFTs. Like, they're all spoken for, and I know there are tons of people who are kind of on the sidelines. They don't even know much about Urbit, but they know that a lot of people like it, and a lot of smart people are working on it. and that's kind of enough for them to say, I believe in this project. I think there's something here. Like, let me know how I can do like a little thing to then kind of be involved. And I really do think that that is kind of one of the purposes of governance tokens, is letting people just get a little bit of upside in the project. And usually that's the start of those people, of, you know, some of those people becoming more involved, learning more, and providing more value to the organization or to the protocol or whatever. But yeah, so I really think I would want to keep it simple and say, like, again, it's, you know, 1,000 tokens are minted per galaxy, and you're just owning a piece of a galaxy, and specifically the voting power.
And the other thing you could think about more long term, but these things potentially could have cash flow, right? They could be businesses. And so at that point, if the people who own it are running it, then, you know, then there'd be probably some revenue share at some point.
Right. Okay. And so how does this look as a public facing project? Like, what is the message to people who want to get involved? What is the next step, especially when it comes to just the finances? Because there's all these thorny challenges when it comes to, you know, this cannot be an unregistered security, something Kenny and I have talked about before. You know, but James, what are you thinking about when it comes to, like, is this just a matter of basically selling the ERC20 token, or are you thinking about something else?
Yeah, well, that's kind of where the word party bid came into play. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the call, I work at a company called Zora. Zora collaborates a lot with this group called Party DAO. Party DAO builds this platform that allows people to buy super expensive NFTs basically together and fractionalize them into an ERC20. So that sort of was the original idea. It's definitely confirmed that, like, we could not use those smart contracts today to buy an Urbit Galaxy. It would be a bad idea. But when I first saw like a party bid happening, I was sort of just like, why are people doing this? And I've seen it happen enough now where I just sort of understand that, like, people want to be able to just sort of be a part of something and then own a piece of something going forward. So there's just this like kind of inherent, like, almost bragging rights or pride that people get, where it's like, I put my point 0.1 ETH into this alien CryptoPunk or whatever, or a zombie actually is what happened. And, you know, I got my ETH in before the thing was closed, and now I own a piece of this token. And, like, we did it. We beat the whale who wanted to buy this CryptoPunk.
Right.
And so I think the same thing kind of applies here. It's like, all these people, you know, not many people own these galaxies, and people don't really know who they are. And I think it would just be exciting for people to be able to be like, oh, well, now 100 people own a galaxy, and we want to buy another one.
Yeah, totally. It's badass. So if we can't use Party DAO, then, I mean, I know Kenny before was mentioning maybe Moloch DAO, or what do we think would be the best infrastructure for actually launching a public facing, ramp for people to join this?
Yeah, well, like James said, start with acquiring the thing. I mean, it doesn't have to be fully decentralized at the beginning. It can just be, you know, a multi-sig, and then find that wrapper, make sure it doesn't have, you know, some silly little exploit in it if you can, and then progressively decentralize from there.
Wait, but Kenny, isn't the whole idea that we don't have a few million lying around?
No, we certainly don't. But you know, if it's one of these naked galaxies, then, like I said, I don't think we're not talking about millions here.
Okay, so for that, so what you're saying, basically get a private group of people together to buy a naked galaxy with a multi-sig and take it from there. That would be,
or at least, I mean, that would be just my hypothetical. I don't really know, right?
Right.
And to the regulations and those sorts of things, I think it's important that you know, our conversation, it is hypothetical. Like, this is something that's interesting, but when it gets more real, well, then that's when maybe potentially legal wrappers come into play. And this is like something like the LAO, which is like it has a legal LLC wrapper around the DAO, which can help provide limited liability if such a thing were necessary. You know, but some people don't think that is, but it's sort of remains to be seen what the best way forward is once there's actually enough interest but there's just other things to be considerate about when it comes to, making these sort of big financial decisions with groups.
Right on, right on. And James, in your research, did you come across any other ways of doing it that you're interested in or wanted to discuss?
Yeah, so I mean, I really just started specking out my own smart contract and how I think it should work. And I probably should have spent more time like, this is a good idea. What DAO frameworks exist today? What will help us? This is something that I would love help researching. But I really started going down this rabbit hole of like, what would this like custom DAO look like? And so I like, writing pseudocode for all these different functions. And yeah, so I mean, the way I'm imagining it now, it is pretty customized. I'm not familiar with like, I'm sure we'd use modules for things like voting and quorum and setting all those rules. I'm sure there are many helpful modules from folks like Compound and Maker, et cetera. But I think this is a new thing at the same time, because we're setting it up, so that people can buy this one kind of NFT, and then we need to make sure that those ERC20 can actually be used to vote in to take part in all the things that the NFT could take part in natively. So yeah, I have like this long doc that I've been writing up. I'm excited to share it with people in the Discord later this week, for how I think it should work. And I think we should basically just cut away at it and say, okay, how can we replace this with something that already exists? Or how could we do this later and just sort of do the core thing now? But yeah, the way I'm thinking of it now is that I would want a multi-sig. I would want sort of like a DAO smart contract and a multi-sig that has initially some privileged control over sort of what goes down in the beginning and is capable of sort of removing itself from that control at some later point in time. So I would want a multi-sig to help me like sort of make some key decisions in the very beginning and potentially like reverse something that everyone can agree was like a mistake or something like that. But then I would want everything to move towards like a ERC20 vote over time. Or also delegates are really helpful here. Like it's much more efficient for a DAO to elect somebody as a delegate to then make decisions rather than like, let's vote on everything.
Right on, right on. So I think shortly we should bring on stage a few of the Urbit people hiding in the wings who want to contribute some thoughts. But we still have plenty of time. Before we do that, I'm curious, Kenny or James, was there anything that I didn't ask you about that was kind of top of mind, or anything you wanted to ask each other that you think is particularly relevant or interesting?
Other than just sort of like I think when I think about ships as businesses, my sort of immediate we're going to have to, payments are going to be really important, right? Interfaces are going to be important. Software distribution will probably be pretty important. Like there's a lot of things that sort of come to mind when I think about this sort of frontier internet that, a few brave souls are sort of pioneering at this point, but there's not a whole lot out there. So I think one of the real key points of this particular group, and groups like Dalten, for example, is having multiple people together to be thinking about what's going to make this better and ways to actually make it better, which is like, resources, right? How do we make this the way we want it to be, as much as we want it to be anything, right? So I guess in these ways, you can even think about this project specifically as almost like being the founding of a small town, right? So we have a little plot of land. We've got a nice little burbling stream running through Main Street. What do we want this place to be? Where do we want to put the park? Where do we want to put the library? All that kind of stuff is kind of the way my mind is thinking when I'm thinking about this sort of group. So if that's something that appeals, to whoever's watching, come find us.
Hell yeah! There's a link to the Discord. Come chat with us, even if you don't know how to mess with Urbit or don't even know what it is, but you're interested in this. There's a link in the show notes. Just come say hi. And yeah, Kenny, that's what I'm trying to talk about. I want to have a little city, a little country, a little city state in the sky. That's where I get really excited, and that's exactly how I see this too. People like Balaji and whoever out there, it's very fashionable right now to talk about building a city in the cloud or network states or this or that. It's like, well, come to fucking Urbit and let's fucking go, baby. Let's actually do it. Let's not stop. Let's quit talking about it. All right, awesome. So we have a question here or a comment here from Wickrun. So I'm going to bring him up for him to tell us about it himself. He has a comment about the risk of degrading Urbit's overall functioning. Let's hear from our friend Wickrun, aka looks like Jack. Hey, Jack, what's going on? Welcome. Maybe start, if you would, by giving us a quick little introduction, if you want, a little bit about your background briefly, and then tell us whatever you wanted to share.
Yeah, sure. So I've been into Bitcoin for crypto for 10 years, basically, and did make it out together with Kenny. And, I'm into Urbit at the moment. And so one thing that I kind of like about Urbit is its governance structure, which is like very human as opposed to systematic. And I think that even though the constitution at the moment is very minimal, I still think that it's tiered model and actual councils having one vote each is fairly sophisticated compared to just regular token voting, which is normally what's used in these DAOs. And I'm asking, if we want to acquire all the galaxies, are we afraid of accidentally degrading how the Senate is governed or not? And do we hope to evolve with the rest of crypto space when it comes to governance? Or what's the or maybe it's not a problem. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. My initial answer is really that I really just want to acquire this first galaxy and see if we can kind of lay the groundwork based on how that experience goes before we do anything else. And I think at that point, owning 1/256th of the Urbit governance power, there's not much potential for, I think, disruption to the community or the way things work. And then another thing too is we would need to, if we're talking about this vision of owning every galaxy, obviously we'll need to really know the galaxy owners and actually interface with them and actually provide value to them, because obviously not every galaxy owner would ever want to sell. So what I would really want it to feel like is that a galaxy owner is coming on board and actually taking part in what we're doing and is not losing anything in the process. So I would love to have a mechanism for someone to just basically bring their galaxy, mint tokens. It's kind of locked up. But anyways, regardless, I think this is going to take a while, and I think we will move slow enough to be able to figure out kind of what works and what doesn't before we have accidentally, half of the Urbit governance power.
James, I love how before you're I have no interest in domination, but also, by the way, anything short of 256 galaxies, not interested.
Right. Well, I mean, it's at that point, that just means that everybody who cares about Urbit and Urbit governance is a part of this thing. That's really what it means.
Actually, maybe we could pause on that real quick, and then I want to hear from Kenny if Kenny has any observations on risks to degrading the network functioning. But I'm still maybe not quite parsing this. I don't see what would be so bad if we only collectively controlled one galaxy. That still seems perfectly cool and interesting to me. So maybe I don't see why you are so concerned about getting all 256.
Yeah, so it's not a strict requirement. Obviously, we can say it's basically impossible. But the idea is that I want to make a new governance token for Urbit, and I want that to be a reason that a lot of these Web3 people in the world that I'm in finally say, okay, let me get some and see what's going on here.
Wait, so
and in order, just to finish my, so in order to do that, if our goal is strictly to buy one galaxy, then that is limiting ourselves to 1/256th of the Urbit governance power, and it limits our ability to say this is a governance token that actually relates to Urbit. And so instead, I think it needs to be infinitely extensible to sort of encompassing all Urbit governance power, because I actually do believe in governance tokens' ability to get people excited about something. Gotcha.
So are you kind of alluding a little bit to some of the interesting kind of ideological differences perhaps that circulate with, people in the, are you kind of suggesting that people in the ETH community are going to be more jazzed up by the possibility of fundamentally kind of changing and kind of distributing this 256 unit governance structure? Is that the idea? And anything short of that is like just less, it's less exciting. It's less interesting and attractive.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not quite sure how to answer that, but I do think that I don't think it'll be a huge cultural difference. Like, I think, if you look at the people that are interested in this already and have actually signed up for the Discord, like there's a lot of Urbit usernames in the Discord. But I think it's about like having a long tail of people that just want a little piece of something and to sort of be along for the ride. Like Urbit doesn't have that as far as governance goes, and is such an inherently valuable project, and I know it. And if they open themselves up to having that long tail, like I think it would really materially change things for the community and for the way that it works. And even if like, a lot of people like to, by the way, a lot of people like to buy governance tokens and never vote, or they delegate their votes and never touch it. And a lot of people don't even know what votes are going on at any given time. So it's kind of irrational. I think I'm trying to appeal to like an irrational thing that people are clearly excited about doing.
Okay, gotcha. Kenny, did you want to talk about any of that, or do you have any thoughts or comments on Jack's larger question around governance degradation through something like this?
Yeah, I think actually to Jack's point, the Constitution, or we call it the Galactic Senate as well, right? I think it's robust enough that it can accommodate a structure like this. And remember, the Senate is the ultimate sort of like arbiter of who owns what. And so if some weird thing were to happen where, one galaxy, not even this group, but like some other rogue galaxy were to come in and start making trouble to the point where, if the other galaxies agreed that this person isn't actually going to own any of the network anymore, that's something within their power to do, right? They're the ultimate sovereign when it comes to governance itself, meaning, so if there ever was a point of conflict, which, I think we should be honest, organizations and networks go through maturity phases, and Urbit will likely have some sort of existential governance crisis at some point. And it could very well be something like this, where there's, a small group of senators who've been there from the beginning, and this larger group of really enthusiastic, but larger, that want more of a say in more. And that's going to have to get resolved at some point. And you can see this clearly working out through, traditional governance structures and sort of meat space. So I don't see that it would be all that different, but I also don't see it as a problem because it is part of a life cycle. It's part of a maturing. It will happen at some point, probably. And Urbit is also bigger than just, its own governance. You don't actually need, this was the design choice the founders of Urbit chose to make this network work. Yeah, you can fork it. It's just a computer. It's open source.
Yeah, see, I feel like this is almost as exciting and as motivating as, the ambition to have a token that fractionalizes all of the 256. To me, I feel like it's more interesting and more exciting if there's two camps that each own 128 galaxies, or there's like a race. There's a race to get majority control of galaxies. To me, that's gonna elicit a lot of interest and. I find that just kind of fascinating. It is pretty fascinating to think through the politics of how this all kind of plays out.
I think it'd be cool. But as I've thought through this, I think there would be like a key turning point. Like, let's say, we've acquired like 26 or, 25 galaxies. I think there would be a key turning point where we would want to focus on how do we make this organization and this protocol valuable to existing galaxy owners. So there would be this kind of key, because again, this is just going to take a while. So I would want at some point, I think this would be a great problem to have. I would want the group to think about, okay, how do we make Galaxy owners like us and actually prefer, in a way, to hold this ERC20 over their Galaxy. So I think, that could be like a way to avoid some kind of 128 to 128 conflict. Is basically. Because like in the case of Party Bid, there's been some of these kind of epic moments where like there's one ETH whale and there's a bunch of people and at some point the ETH whale just joins the party, and then they all own it. And it's like those have been really exciting moments, and I think there's potential for that here too.
Right, right. Something that I was just thinking about, actually two quick things. One is that if we were to do this and actually start buying up galaxies at the point that we got to 25 or 50 galaxies, the few holdouts who are individuals who own galaxies would be filthy rich, right? And it's almost like the longer they hold out, the more they have to gain in a way. But it sounds like you're more bullish on there being incentive structures that would pull them in.
Yeah, I think incentives are huge, and then also, I mean, the longer you wait, the less likely it is, in a sense, that you'll be able to easily sell your galaxy. So I think there actually is some, I think you could think of it like there is some potential loss in not selling and trying to wait and hold out and sell it for a higher price. Like at a certain point, like we might just run out of the crowdfunding ability, and the amount of we might start to hit like the overall market cap of Urbit Galaxies, and maybe you just missed your chance. So I don't think it's necessarily true that you would be, by holding out, you'd be just making yourself rich, because it's also, you're making yourself less liquid.
Okay, interesting. So I'm going to bring up Eduardo, aka Fabled Faster. Eduardo, what's going on? Eduardo, welcome to the stream.
Hi.
How you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. It's been a busy day. Lots of general design stuff, user research, interviews, that sort of thing. Just an ordinary day.
Right on. Feel free to jump in anywhere you want to. One other quick thing I wanted to throw onto the table is that I don't know if this is public, or I hope I'm not like leaking some private knowledge or something, but I have heard whispers of some kind of internal projects to fractionalize Urbit address space. Does anyone know anything about that? Can we talk about that? Is that top secret, or am I making that up?
What do you mean by internal? Like inside Urbit?
Like, I don't know if it's like led by Tlon or by the Urbit Foundation or something. Am I making that up?
No. Well, there was a group of Galaxy holders that were interested in this idea, not so much from the Galaxy perspective, but from the Star perspective. So they went off and did their own thing, and they basically came to the point where they had something nearly finished. And at that point, Tlon doesn't really have a choice but to sort of, look at it and make sure there isn't some obvious mistakes. So in that way, there is a project that exists. I don't have a lot of details about it, other than I know it's there, and that it was started by sort of a third party. And
okay, well,
it's focused on stars.
I guess whoever's out there watching this or listening to this, if you know those people, you might want to send them a link to this, and maybe they can get in touch with James or Kenny or I. Eduardo, did you hear anything that struck your interest, or anything you wanted to add to, or ask about, or comment on?
Nothing that Kenny didn't already bring up with respect to the star fractionalization. It's just a sort of like a interesting point to make, that at varying levels in the system, both from sort of the personal to the more governance oriented, there's just a lot of projects on sort of, I guess one way of putting it is just really diversifying the way in which individual compute sort of representations, whether it's an individual, personal server, a planet, or something much larger like a galaxy that maybe has a lot more to do with the sort of the network as it stands as a sort of large system or organism, really. It's just interesting to note that at sort of all these varying levels, there's sort of different projects at different scales, obviously, to enact sort of a more varied landscape of I guess just sort of like a grain of material, if you will, for the way that the network feels, which is interesting. It's like, I guess like the one thing to sort of note, stepping back from it, is that there's always been a sort of critique levied at Urbit as being sort of like a unidirectional sort of structure, or one that sort of is too strict or too rigid to succeed in any meaningful way. But you already get a sense, if you are at all involved in the network to whatever degree, that there are a lot of one way to put it is really there are a lot of politics at play. There are a lot of different goals, a lot of different ways of thinking about how the network can be made used, which is just worth noting, I guess, as a bit of a meta point.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. I actually had a question, I think, going back to something that James had said before. James, you were saying that if there was a DAO that was buying up Galaxies, that holdouts, individuals who held on to their individually owned Galaxies, would risk becoming illiquid in the end, like they would get screwed in the end. I think I didn't quite get that. It wasn't obvious to me. Why would there be a threshold at which they would get like shut out? What would happen there?
Oh, right. No, I just meant that like there is, finite interest in this idea. And so the longer you hold out and the more you watch other Galaxy owners sell or like kind of sell and join, the more you're putting yourself at risk that like we just kind of run out of funding and interest in buying the next one.
I see.
So like, right, because it would take a lot of money to like market buy if it were possible every Urbit Galaxy. So I was just saying that you're putting yourself at risk of it being harder and harder to actually sell. And it already is hard to sell. So maybe that's not a great point. But
okay,
yeah.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Well, I think we covered a lot of ground. I don't want to keep people up too long, but was there anything we didn't cover or any other interesting observations, comments, thoughts, questions?
I had one for Ed. So Ed, you've spoken kind of elegantly about the design of sort of the Galactic Senate, or at least the sort of the aesthetics that kind of surround that whole governance body. Do you think having more people involved would significantly sort of change some of those things that are sort of starting to form now, or would it even sort of, or how do you think about having more people coming in and how that might change the dynamics of the group?
I mean, it's a really good question. It's one that I would never suggest to have any sort of authority over, or a take that is significantly informed to the degree that you might expect it to be. Just one thing to note, I think that had been brought up by other people in the network who I think were involved earlier than not, is that one of the sort of elements of just the sort of limited nature of the governance structure as it is such that you can almost guarantee that every Galaxy holder at this point is probably someone with some significant stake in the network in the sense of actually contributing work, the classic sort of proof of work to the way that the system is sort of enacted or has been thus far. And I think one of the sort of general worries that I'm really only enunciating for the benefit of what I have heard in the past from people who have been involved for a long time is that any sort of more larger net that is cast for a set of votes, if you do have a Galaxy, for example, that is sort of driven by the desires of 1,000 people, 10,000 people, you kind of get a bit of a dilution in the people who are, well, this is, I'm again, enunciating a fact that I have heard in the past, is that you kind of get a dilution of sort of interest or sort of stake in actually how the network is being built, which I know is argued, back and forth, even in Ethereum as it stands, who are all these people who own, Uni or Gitcoin or whatever, who are just sitting around not exacting their votes, or who are the whales with thousands of these coins who don't do anything, whether they're delegating or not. There's just a lot of sort of critique levied against sort of this tokenized or fractional nature voting that I have zero authority or knowledge over, really, to be quite frank. I just generally get a sense that the limited nature of Galaxy tokens really did sort of enunciate the fact that everyone who owns one is sort of within that Dunbar number. You can almost guarantee that there's a pretty solid community of sort of governance enactors in a pool of less than 300 people. So it's a point worth bringing up. I'm not saying that there's either sort of extreme that I personally support. I've always been sort of the pool of people who are interested in seeing a very varied set of natures for Galaxies to emerge, whether we have the tyrants who, want a dictatorial status over their weird little kingdom, in the corner of the universe, or even the Federation of Galaxies who are all doing the sort of democratic voting thing. I find the sort of more varied or patchwork network to be a lot more interesting than sort of like, a sort of, uniform body of governance personally. But
yeah, totally. I mean, that could become the tail. That could become the tale of the century. The tale of Web3, a division between the tyrannical sect and the democratic sect. and let's do this. I think that's so interesting, because you're essentially basically trying to solve age-old, eternal political theoretical questions through practice, basically through experimentation and through competition. And I mean, I think it's just almost mind-bogglingly exciting and fascinating to think that we could actually, now we're in a place where we have the tools to actually start trying these experiments, like buying up Galaxies and distributing ownership over of them, and just seeing what happens, seeing where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a final reference to be made here, which for those of you in the crowd who have ever watched Legend of the Galactic Heroes, it's a classic, an old anime. Not to get that into the mix, but the classic sort of struggle here is that you have virtuous and terrible people on both highly sort of distributed universalist kind of democratic spheres, and at the same time, in more authoritarian circles, it's like you can have like people who really want a better world for the people that they govern on either side. You can have the people who want to exploit and squash people at either end of that spectrum. This is again highly simplifying it, but just goes to show that no matter how the sort of galactic distribution goes, we'll see a really interesting sort of tale, as you said, unfold regardless of how it ends up going.
Yeah, I mean, another interesting wrinkle here is that you could imagine a future in which you fully tokenize all 256 galaxies, but then subsequently there's a long run equilibrium where maybe only 256 people roughly own all of the tokens. Who knows, right? So there's a lot of interesting like live wires when it comes to like how the real long-term equilibrium really shakes out.
Yeah. I mean, I again don't want to hold on the people in the crowd for far too long, but I was curious if anyone was interested in maybe me elucidating some sort of thoughts about how we were getting into sort of more, kind of a governance infrastructure, if you will, for the way that we're working with interfaces thus far at Tlon. I'm happy to sort of I know that I wrote that in my little, hey, this is what I could talk about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I booked Kenny and James for an hour and a half, and so we're coming up on about 6 minutes left. So yeah, if you want to, unless anyone has to run, you could. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, Eduardo.
Yeah, no, I could speed run it. So the TLDR is that we've acknowledged that our group's infrastructure, the interfaces themselves that constitute communities on landscape, they've been in somewhat of a sort of a sketch-like sort of test nature, in that we provided a very minimal set of functionality that you would expect out of something like a Discord or a Slack. We do acknowledge that it is minimal, in fact. The idea behind some of this sort of near-term goals for evolving the structure is that per the needs that we are seeing outlined by people who are using Discords for DAO, discussion, or for sort of the various, social needs that you would have for any sort of governance structure. The idea is to sort of take into stride the fact that people are kind of cobbling together a bunch of services to get to the end goal. Whereas with something like groups, we do truly want to build something that is sort of natively aligned to things like tokenized governance, to voting, to sort of collective share over any aspect of the group, whether it has anything to do with crypto or not. So the long or the short of it is that, in the very near future, after we sort of get software distribution out the door as a very massive project, we really would love to see and get a lot more feedback as to how we can build something that's a lot more natively aligned with everything that we've discussed on the call today. That's all. That's all I had to sort of enunciate.
Yeah, this is just an initial first discussion, really just to get the ball rolling, to plant a little flag in the ground, to say this is something that we're interested in considering and analyzing, and if possible, moving forward on. So if any of this was of any interest to you, definitely just come say hi. And I put links in the show notes to the Discord that James started specifically for this. And James also started an Urbit group specifically for this. So like I said, links in the show notes. And come say hi, reach out if you have anything to add, any skills, knowledge, ideas, or it's just something that you're curious about. So I thought this was very rewarding and fascinating, first discussion. It seems like there's this could really happen. So I just want to thank James for floating this idea on Twitter and for starting the discussion. And I want to thank Kenny and Eduardo and everyone else for coming out tonight. Hey, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. You made it all the way to the very end, so you must really like the show. In that case, I would be super grateful if you'd be so kind to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. All you have to do is go to otherlife.co/review. That's otherlife.co/review. And it'll send you to Apple Podcasts. Just leave a review. You can be honest. Tell me what you really think. I'd really appreciate it because it'll help other people find the show, and I'm really trying to grow out the podcast. So thanks for listening, and thank you for leaving a review. I really appreciate it.